In 1971, as America's war in Vietnam sputtered toward its end, one forgotten firebase was left to rot. The men are exhausted, the officers are useless, and in the jungle, the enemy is gathering for something massive. For most of the Marines trapped there, the mission is simple: survive long enough to go home. But Captain Caste has a problem. War is the only thing that makes him feel alive. And as the base is swallowed by blood, fire, and madness, Caste will be forced to make a choice that does not just decide whether or not he survives Vietnam, it also determines what he will become after. Hey guys, it's your host Juan, back again for another epic story time. Today, we'll be covering Punisher, Born, written by Garth Ennis with art by Darick Robertson. Yeah, this was a miniseries published in the early 2000s, and it launched the Punisher Max series for Marvel. Basically, the Max imprint was a line of adult-oriented comics, where creators could do whatever they wanted, uncensored. Yeah. But before we begin, I will let you know that there is some political and social commentary in today's story. And that's not me, okay? It's Ennis. It's him. Please don't get mad at me for it. My analysis will be at the end. Anyway, do make sure you're subscribed to the channel, okay? And also hit that like button while you're at it. But yeah, enough with all of that. Let's jump right in. Our story opens in 1971 on U.S. Firebase Valley Forge, located 7 miles from the Cambodian border in South Vietnam. We see a cargo plane fly low over the perimeter of the base. On the ground below, a group of men casually watch, smoking with bored expressions. However, their faces are shaken to alarm when the plane gets pelted by sudden anti-air fire. One wing breaks apart entirely, and the aircraft loses control, and the men are forced to scramble away as it nearly crashes on top of them. The impact sends a massive fireball into the air, and the smoke can be seen for miles. And from the jungle, a platoon of Marines watch with detached amusement. They exchange money with one another, paying off bets that the plane would or would not crash. However, one among them is awfully quiet. His name is Stevie Goodwin, and he's among the many young men drafted into the Corps to serve during the Vietnam War. But his contract is almost up. He's short. Just 39 more days and he'll be on that beautiful plane that takes him home. A nice cold beer in hand, and the best damn sleep of his life. Stevie can't stop thinking about it. He refuses to die in Vietnam. He will not become addicted to the adrenaline firefights, and most importantly, he will not fall in love with war, like his commander, Captain Frank Caste. Don't get it twisted, Caste is an exemplary officer. Since he arrived at Firebase Valley Forge 6 months ago, he has not lost a single man on any of his patrols, which is perhaps not that surprising. It's well known that Caste distinguished himself from the start during his first tour back in '68, so much so that he was recruited into Special Forces for his second. And what went on there is a complete black box. Rumors of assassinations and covert operations, but no one really knows for sure. But the point is that for a man with those kind of qualifications to be sent to the middle of nowhere leading an infantry, well, that's proof enough that the war must truly be winding down. But in any case, the captain signals to halt, and the Marines quickly position themselves in the grass. They carefully wait as an armed contingent of the Viet Cong march alongside Water Buffalo hauling crates of supplies through the dense jungle. The Americans open fire at once, and the force is overwhelming, and the bulk of the enemy falls under the torrent of bullets. The Kong still standing are either sniped where they stand or forced to retreat into the trees. Amid the chaos, one of the fleeing Vietnamese manages to trip over a claymore mine, triggering a massive explosion which rips him apart. When the dust settles, only one Kong remains, and the Marines laugh as one of them throws a grenade at the moving target like a football. Stevie takes no pleasure in these gruesome theatrics. He just thinks about the world back home, about the pretty girl he'll meet one day and marry, and the sons they'll raise together. Stevie vows to himself that he'll show them the best of their country, the good America, the real America. We transition back to Valley Forge, where Frank Caste is delivering his report to his superior, a man named Colonel Ott. As the colonel sips on his drink, Castle explains that the Viet Cong they killed this morning were carrying enough rifles, ammunition, and mortars to supply an entire company. And it was all North Vietnamese army equipment, smuggled through Cambodia to the south on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And that is not good. As Castle points out, that was the third supply line they hit in the last couple weeks. And who knows how many others they've missed that made it through. But regardless, the pattern is clear. The Vietnamese are stockpiling for a major offensive. For that reason, Castle recommends that the isolated base be put on active alert and all preparations should be made for its defense. But the colonel doesn't respond or take any interest in this. He just pours himself another drink and offhandedly remarks that a 2-star general will be arriving within the hour to inspect the firebase. The colonel murmurs that he's got a feeling he's going to be sick with malaria by the time the general arrives, so it's up to Castle to be the one to give him the tour. Frank looks at his superior in disgust and marches out the door. The Major General's helicopter touches down at sunset. He's an angry, aggressive man, small in stature, and he starts laying into Castle the moment he sees him. Spit flying from his mouth, he shouts that the state of Valley Forge is completely unacceptable. In his short time here, he's already witnessed unmanned bunkers kept in disarray and rusty, unattended equipment. And of course, the flagrant, open drug use. The general demands an explanation at once as to why Frank's firebase is such a pathetic disgrace to the country and Corps. Clear-eyed, Frank calmly responds that the last officer who tried to restore order on base woke up next to a mine one morning. The general promptly calls him a liar, and he barks that the fragging myth is unsubstantiated. Propaganda used only by the flower childs back at home to undermine the war effort. He tells Frank to cut the bullshit and list right now the actions he's taken to get the Valley Forge base back up and running. And to this, Captain Castle sharply lays out the facts. The base is severely undermanned, and the ones who do get sent here are the shitbags nobody else wants. And somehow, even despite being understaffed, they're still short on supplies. The general snarls that it sounds like a good thing then that he's about to recommend in his report the immediate shutdown of the base. In a low growl, Frank notes that Valley Forge is the last post still watching Cambodia. The general snaps at him to get it through his head that the US involvement in Indochina is at its end. The Viet Cong are no longer Castle's concern. They're all gonna get shipped home, and if the general had his way, Castle will be out of the Corps entirely. He dismisses Frank with disdain, and he's about to get back on the chopper when our hero casually mentions that there's still one thing the general didn't see, which will definitely change his mind about closing the base. Fuming with impatience, he follows Frank to the firebase perimeter. He demands to know what the hell he's supposed to be looking at, and Frank points up a staircase leaning against the wall. The general climbs to the top and angrily looks around, but only for a moment, because in a split second his head pops. He never saw the sign Frank was leaning against, warning about the sniper guarding the fence from the tower. Stevie is one of the Marines who loads away the dead body in the chopper that night. They assume the general was just a fool whose inattentiveness got him killed. They don't know the truth, and they definitely don't know what's going on in the head of their captain, who they spot at a distance, sitting alone. You see, Castle's got his own personal war going on. There's this dark voice that speaks to him from the crevices of his own mind. It commends him for his crafty trick on the general there, but the voice also reminds him that what the man said was true. The Vietnam War really is ending, and there's nothing he can do about it. But the voice knows how deeply Frank loves the conflict. It's not about killing the enemy or protecting the ally or his men. Nah, that's just incidental. He loves the war 'cause he needs it. That intoxicating feeling when you know you're right where you're supposed to be, doing exactly what you were meant to. The voice promises Frank that it can make it so the war lasts forever. There will be a price to pay, of course, but if he just says the word, the oozing blackness will transform into the most perfect clarity. And isn't that what he wants? Or, the voice asks, is he perhaps wondering who it is speaking to him? Well, there is no answer to that other than the question reversed. Who do you think it is? We pick up the next morning as Stevie Goodwin drifts into a seedy bunker where his friend, Angel, is in the process of cooking up a shot of heroin. Stevie informs his fellow Marine that the captain is taking the platoon on a patrol and he can't be fucked up and high for it. As he drags Angel away, a man named Coltrane barges after them, asking who's gonna pay for the drugs he supplied. Stevie pulls out some petty cash, but the man coldly tells him that ain't gonna be enough. And Coltrane's associate even pulls a razor out on them. But then the villains suddenly stop, and they hastily shuffle away. And that would be because they caught sight of Frank Caste standing nearby. Frank doesn't say anything about the interaction, other than it's Stevie's responsibility to make sure Angel stays clean for the mission. And so, the platoon marches off the base and into the jungle. Out of the over 100 personnel at Firebase Valley Forge, these 2.5 men are the only ones willing or able to go out on offensive patrol sweeps for the enemy. Essentially a volunteer force. Each has their own reason for being there. Some do it because they still feel duty-bound. Others treat it like a morbid game, collecting scalps and whatnot. And others, well, they just love the combat. Stevie's there for Angel. He could very well, easily, and understandably hang back at the base and wait out his 30-odd days. Hell, that's practically what you're supposed to do. But Angel saved his life once, and so Stevie is determined to watch over his friend and ensure that he makes it through. But that's all theoretical. Narratives the Marine tosses through his head to occupy himself and keep track of what is happening and why. Because the practical reality is that the platoon is trudging along through the jungle for hours on end, suffocating under thick, humid air. In Vietnam, things can go wrong in the blink of an eye, and they often do. The platoon is walking steady, when out of the blue, one of the men gets shot through the neck by a hidden sniper. The corpsman rushes to his fallen brother, and he too gets shot down from a different angle. There are multiple gunmen. The Marines hit the deck, but that fails to stop another of them from getting shot in the face and killed. Most of the men just curl up and freeze, but one among them is unaffected. Frank Caste yanks a machine gun out of a man's hand, and he stands out in the open, alone, fearlessly shooting into the treetops. Stevie and Angel watch in awe as the man whips around like a machine, knocking down the snipers with a cold, expressionless face. And so it ends as quickly as it began, and the jungle floor itself seems to swallow the blood. 6 of their men died during the skirmish, and the rest of the Marines combed through the area to confirm the kills. One of the men, McDonald, spots a wounded Viet Cong sniper dragging themselves away in the dirt. She tries to shoot herself, but McDonald punts her with the back of his foot. The others rush over and form a circle around the girl. She's still alive, and they have no idea what to do with her. But then McDonald unbuckles his pants, declaring that he knows what to do. He forcefully moves on the girl, and while he's trying to restrain her, a pair of heavy boots step out in front of him. With a loud bang, the girl's blood splatters across McDonald's face. Captain Caste just shot her in the head. In a gruff voice, he notifies the startled Marines that they're here on a mission only to kill. The men disperse, and Stevie leans on a tree, about ready to throw up. He just wants to go home. However, he snapped out of it when he hears a splash in the water behind him. From across the riverbank, he sees McDonald kneeling down and washing the mess off his face. But then the bugger's eyes go wide as a boot forcefully presses against the back of his neck. As if he were squashing a bug, Castle holds McDonald's head underwater with his full weight. The man flails around, struggling to breathe, but it's no use. His body goes limp as the light falls out of his eyes forever. Stevie cowers behind a tree. He stops holding his breath only when he's sure that the captain finally left. Try as they might, the platoon never managed to find McDonald, and so they were forced to return to base without him. Stevie certainly didn't say a word about it. He downs cans of beer outside his bunker in order to forget, but that will only get him so far. Out of the shadows steps Captain Caste. The kid nearly chokes on his drink when Frank asks him directly why he didn't say anything to anyone about what he saw. Stevie stutters that he was just scared, and in a broken whisper, he asks Frank why he did it. The man pauses, and in an unnaturally calm and logical voice, he answers that it was because he wanted to punish him. The girl couldn't be saved. She was Kong, and you don't waste medical supplies on enemy combatants. And even if they did capture her for interrogation, well, the intelligence people would have just done what McDonald tried to, and she would have wound up dead either way. Before turning to leave, Frank tersely reminds the young Marine that he doesn't have to be afraid of him. Oh, but Stevie is. Definitely is. It terrifies him to his core that even after all this, he knows that Frank Caste remains far and away the best man to lead them through this jungle hell. And what kind of environment selects for a man like that? 'Cause, the way he talked about that girl, it's almost as if he thinks what he did to her was an act of benevolent favor. Stevie spent most of the third day thinking about the Vietnam War. It's a curious, on its face, almost paradoxical war. In the one sense, the leadership is absolute shit, and the strategy is ad hoc. The men are forced into terrible positions and made to do terrible things. And for what? Back home, the country is tearing itself apart. But despite all of that, America simply cannot lose. Sure, in the end we may throw up our hands and go home, but that doesn't matter, 'cause at minimum, the rest of the world will take note of what the US did in Vietnam, and they'll forever know what's on the table should they ever decide to fuck with us. A victory of some kind, but Stevie doesn't really understand why it's even necessary. In his view, they got everything they could possibly need right at home in the States. So why do we need to entangle ourselves in imbroglios thousands of miles away? But the pondering is cut off there. Sleek jets loudly rip through the skies above Stevie and Angel's heads. Something you just can't help but stop and watch. Captain Castle and the Colonel see them fly by as well, though for them, they're less of an object of wonder. To Castle, the jets are a bad omen. They're flying low, trying to stay under the weather. There's a big storm brewing, and when it hits, air support will be taken off the table. And if that wasn't spooky enough, Frank points out that they haven't had a resupply in ages, and they're dangerously low on ammunition. Indifferent, the Colonel admits that he never ordered a restock, and he lays it out thick to Castle. The war is almost over, and everyone knows it. The game right now is not to rock the boat, and then they get to go home. And it's well past time Castle shut up and got with the program. Frank glares at the Colonel with disdain. He's supposed to have a responsibility to the base, to the men. He's been warned repeatedly that the Vietnamese are organizing for some kind of major operation. Why isn't he taking any of this seriously? The Colonel takes a long swig from his flask, and he sluggishly announces that he's got to go take a shit. Frank's eyes follow him as he goes, methodical, almost predatory. He stalks the Colonel all the way to the latrine, and he stands outside of it with a grenade in hand, finger already in the pin. But, for whatever reason, at the last possible second, Castle narrows his eyes and abruptly walks away. As the night falls, the man mechanically drifts around the base, checking on everything and making sure it's in order. All the while, the disembodied voice slithers on back in his ear. It hisses at Frank, asking why he pulled back from killing the Colonel. It's not like anyone would have known or cared. If he had killed him, he would be in charge of the base, which is what he made such a big deal of earlier. So why didn't he do it? The voice mockingly asks if it's because he's scared that the real reason he almost did it was just because he wanted to. I mean, yesterday alone, he killed both the General and MacDonald. Maybe he's worried that he's out of control. But surely they deserved it, right? The voice laughs that Frank's got nothing to be ashamed about. It's no worries. The voice can make it so that he never has to stop. He can kill every single one, and all he has to do is just say the word. Without even realizing it, Castle finds himself standing outside Stevie's bunker. He watches the kid ease the spring on his gun. With an absent look, Frank asks Stevie if he's aware that he has a family of his own. The young Marine hesitantly replies that no one really knows anything about him. Castle looks at him, And as if he were reciting operational details, he mentions his 4-year-old daughter, his wife, and the child she found out she was pregnant with a week after he shipped out for his third tour. Cutting himself off, Frank absent-mindedly mutters that sometimes he thinks that they might be his last chance. There is a heavy silence, and Frank straightens up and orders Stevie to make sure all the magazines are reloaded. He also informs the lad that he spotted Angel heading into Coltrane's bunker a little bit ago. Castle watches as the kid departs into the pouring rain after his friend. The voice sneers, asking what the hell was up with all that mushy bullshit Frank was peddling. Why all the shallow performances? In the darkness, you don't have to pretend. You can be whoever you were meant to be. Meanwhile, Stevie walks straight up to the heavyset Coltrane and slams him upside the head with his rifle. He marches straight inside and grabs the zonked-out Angel, supporting him on his shoulder and dragging him away from the drug den. It takes a couple hours for Angel to come down, and Stevie waits with him every step of the way. He's pissed off, though. Angel is even shorter than he is. Why is he so determined to take a drug addiction back home with him? Angel snaps. He's beyond sick of all the preachy moralizing. Stevie's got something to go back to. College, family, friends, structure, opportunity. All Angel's got waiting for him is a rundown ghetto. Stevie's always droning on and on about the supposed real America, and how the shit they're in right now is some tragic misstep and isn't really us. And it's infuriating. In his view, Stevie is the one who's high in some fantasy land. And even if he wasn't, even if all his dreams were actually true, they sure as shit would never include someone like Angel in them. Stevie wholeheartedly rejects this framing, and the two Marines angrily raise their voices at each other. However, then they hear a distant boom, and the ground beneath them tremors. And in an instant, all hell breaks loose as the base erupts into cries that the enemy has just broken through the firebase perimeter. Stevie and Angel scramble to their positions, but with the explosions, gun rounds, and discordant shouting, they can barely think straight. But then, Captain Castle steps into the center, roaring over the noise for illumination. The flares shoot into the sky, igniting so bright the night briefly becomes day, revealing hundreds of screaming Vietnamese militants crawling up the hilltop from the jungle to Valley Forge. The fourth day is born in blood. We open on a young man clutching his face, screaming, and overlaid on top of the dark scene are reflections on the state of industrial war. The text reads that there is a great beast loose in the world of man. In the face of 2 world wars, this beast arose. Deals were made and structures created, and so the great beast was made to defeat evil and liberate the people. But eventually, the handlers found that they didn't actually control it. It controlled them. The beast has many names, and it wears many faces. Lockheed Martin, Colt Defense, Northrop Grumman. And they're hungry. The great beast must be fed. Every generation will have its war. There need be no pretense, no reason other than war for war's sake. It's cleansing. The beast drools for it. And yes, some will be sacrificed to the machinery. Today, it will be Valley Forge. Hell has overtaken the base, and the Marines fight for every inch against a horde that's creeping ever closer. One of the men yells at Frank that the radio man managed to make brief contact with an air unit before the storm cut reception. He's also informed that the colonel was found curled up in a ball, repeating the phrase, "Don't rock the boat," again and again. Stern-faced, Castle instructs him to keep signaling until they get air support. And as for the colonel, just fucking shoot him. But he barely finishes that sentence before another Marine screams out that the entire left flank is collapsing. Frank shouts that they are too. He orders for all artillery to fire on their position, and so he and his men retreat further back, ceding the ground as lost to the overwhelming mob. But as the rest of the Marines sprint away deeper into the base, Angel stands rooted, trying to unjam his gun. Stevie yells at him to drop it and run for God's sake. Angel whips around in fury, shouting at him to take a look around them. There is no God. Stevie's never able to respond. Angel's head is blown off the moment he utters those words, leaving a frozen Stevie by himself to face the wave charging through the base. With deafening booms, the artillery unit executes Castle's command. They blast away line after advancing line, but there's just too many, and they break through, and the gunners abandon their post in panic. Meanwhile, Stevie is hiding behind a fortification. He's discovered, though, not from the enemy, but from Coltrane of all people. He headlocks Stevie and cuts into his forehead with a razor, demanding to know where Angel is. But then, out of nowhere, Frank Castle appears, and he strikes Coltrane's skull with a steel shovel. The captain looks down at the trembling Marine and informs him that it's time to move. The two men sneak around the base, which has at this point become eerily quiet. They watch the Vietnamese burning down structures, and Stevie realizes that he and Frank are the last two Americans remaining. Without really thinking or even knowing why, he follows his captain's lead, shadowing him as he charges directly at the enemy forces. And suddenly, the air itself seems to rip apart as low-flying jets tear through the skies above them, indiscriminately unloading heavy explosives and napalm over the entire area. In an instant, the base becomes a boiling inferno, and their boots practically melt where they stand. Frank yells at Stevie to shoot off smoke so the planes won't target their location. The kid fumbles with the canister, but he's stopped when a shrieking man emerges from the flames like a demon from hell, barreling at him with a bayonet. But right when he's about to hit, Stevie is roughly yanked away. He's pulled onto a pristine American airliner, peacefully cruising among the bright white clouds. The pretty attendants gush over him. They all call his name, and everyone is so happy to see him. Stevie leans back with a big smile, eyes brimming with tears. He made it. He finally gets to go home. Frank's alone now, with only the prowling voice to keep him company. It watches him as he struggles to survive. He never gives up, but he's getting worn down all the same. He keeps accumulating hits and stabs, and his gun is about to burn out. Almost hysterical, the voice laughs that this is exactly what Frank wanted. Who signs up for 3 tours in Vietnam if this were not precisely the thing they were looking for? But that's okay. The voice did tell him before that it alone could grant him what he so desperately craves. All Frank has to do is admit it. It's up to him to face the truth that always was and embrace it. I mean, isn't it something? A war that will never end. What do you say? Blood spilling through his clenched teeth, Frank Caste spits out the word like a curse already written. Yes! When the storm clears and the light hits, dozens of American helicopters descend on Valley Forge, and squads of men hop out to mark what exactly went on here. They don't find any survivors at first. Nothing but hundreds of charred and withered corpses. But then they see him. In the smoke, a man stands by himself, still like a statue. A sergeant rushes up to him, asking if he's all right. But when he gets a closer look, he backs off and his eyes grow wide. Frank Caste stands there like a zombie, looking back at them. His eyes are blood red and his skin ashen white. His body is riddled with bullets, and he looms over a pile of dead bodies that weren't killed by napalm. The troops are deeply, deeply disturbed. They load Caste on a jet as quick as they can so they no longer have to handle him. They have no idea what the hell happened, and they're certainly not about to ask. They keep their heads down and do their jobs. Clean up and catalog. And that was that. Months later, Frank is cleared for medical and discharged from the service. And before he knows it, he's back home in the land of the free. He hobbles on crutches through the terminal, reuniting with his wife, Maria, daughter, Lisa, and son, Frank Jr. Maria softly asks him if he intends to go back. Frank shakes his head. He's gone as far as he ever wanted to, and then some. And along the way, he lost sight of the incredible family he had waiting for him. Frank's voice falters off there, and he freezes in place. The other voice is back, and its volume is rattling. It laughs. It's been too long since they last spoke. But they made a deal. After all, it's not every day someone survives something like Valley Forge. But there was always going to be a price to pay, remember? Frank shudders, but the voice assures him that nothing can be done. Things are already in motion. In fact, in just a minute here, Frank will forget this conversation entirely. But he and the voice will work hand in hand for a long time to come. They'll never speak again, though. It's nothing personal, just the nature of the business. And so the story ends with Frank clutching his family. He's sick to his stomach with this sense of foreboding doom, which he was never able to quite make sense of until it was well past too late.
Kowalski, analysis.
So that was Punisher Born. What did you all think? Feel free to share your reactions in the comment section down below. There's a wide array of things that could be discussed. As for me and my analysis, well, I decided to limit myself to two specific, narrow things, so this doesn't become like an hour. Right. I'll first go over my Punisher thesis, and after that, I'll do a little bit of a critique on something in the book. Okay. Right. So, the Punisher. Where did he come from, and why did he end up this way? Because it's a little bit more complicated than just the line that Vietnam made him that way. So, we're about to do some major third channel leakage stuff here. Actively still under construction, BTW. Anyway, it's not so much that the war made Frank Caste who he is. It didn't produce him. No, rather the environment selected for him. Think about it. The Vietnam War was a high-pressure, high-ambiguity environment where order and authority were collapsing in real time. a highly, highly atypical, extreme environment. And frankly, if you couldn't adapt, you died. Now, flip that same thought around to the other side. What kind of people did well there? Well, that would be people who were already possessing the traits or instincts best suited to the more lethal environment. Right. A man like Frank Caste is inevitable in that sense. He emerges because everyone else is maladapted or collapsing under the extreme conditions. And we can go further than that. What traits or behaviors are best optimized to high chaos environments? Well, that would be things like speed, precision, decisiveness. And you can see all of them in Frank. He's almost entirely pure function. And that's why he seems so scary and at times inhuman. He just does things. There's no self-narrative going on there. No justification. It's just mechanical, input-output. If threat, eliminate. If disorder, suppress. And that works fine for war. Or I should even say that's the most optimal configuration. But what happens if it gets out? And this brings us to the Punisher. The Punisher is a containment problem. The Punisher is what happens when a system artifact gets loose from one environment to another. For clarity purposes, think of it like an invasive species. Frank Caste has specific adaptations for a specific context, but when his family dies in the park that day, the constraints collapse, and he goes to war in a civilian society. Which is a big fucking problem. Because now the Vietnam framework, where every threat is immediate and every delay is dangerous, that all becomes pathological absolutism in a different world with more nuance and stronger institutions. Right. Because in Vietnam, hesitation means death, while here at home, it means due process. You get it, okay? Anyway, that's my thesis. The Punisher is a system-specific solution that became actively destabilizing when he got set loose in a different environment. Alright, now we're going to move on to the second subject, which is a critique of Garth Ennis and his beast concept. The word critique sounds a little bit harsh here, and look, I'm not trying to start a flame war, but we gotta do some cleanup here. Okay, so as you all know, the fourth issue begins with a pointed critique of war. It introduces the somewhat abstract notion that there is a great beast which was born during the war economy shifts around the two world wars. Ennis is basically arguing that although the war system was once necessary, after the conflict, things got out of hand due to institutional inertia and corporate interests. He says that the structures that supported the war continued to exist after it was over, and they are heavily incentivized to fulfill their functions in an almost existential way, which is a very Ennis idea. It's essentially the same. It's the same version of the idea behind his comic character Black Noir, right? The guy created for a specific job, then not being able to do it, and therefore eventually breaking down and engineering the very conflict needed for him to act. Right, you get the idea, okay? Now, Ennis is not wrong that war creates its own network, incentive structures, and momentum. That is true. It's very real, but it's not that simple. And he errs in some pretty significant ways. The problem with him and the people of his ideological persuasion is that they almost always make the same fundamental error. I call it the personification problem. And it's not just exclusive to politics, it's a general epistemic issue. But we don't have to worry about that nerd shit, okay? The core point you do need to understand is that someone can profit from something without being the ones responsible for it. I'm going to say it again. Someone can profit from something without being the ones responsible for it. It happens all the time. Constantly, actually. Alright, and this is where I'm going to lose people, because Lockheed is not a villain. It's not a fucking character, bro. In the 21st century, especially, at least in the specific context we're speaking of, Lockheed Martin is chiefly a node. Don't get me wrong, they do have influence, and they're not inert, but at this time, as an emergent actor, they're simply not primary. There is no great beast. Anyway, let's go back for a second and take what I said about benefits not being intrinsically connected to responsibility. Let's take that and apply it. So, it's going to work like this. The existence of a war supporting structure does not itself generate war. Rather, the structures enable the decisions once they get made, and then they help contribute to shaping the parameters of what's even possible. But Lockheed Martin doesn't have like an Iran policy, guys. If it were truly, as Ennis suggests, that there was war for war's sake, driven by a great beast every generation, we wouldn't have these long-running specific targets and actions taken around strategic and political windows. In short, the problem with Ennis and his types are that they choose legibility over understanding. Yeah, the metaphors are great and all, but you've essentially created dummy targets that absorb outrage and don't actually map onto reality. And that's why they always lose. But that about does it for today's video. Sorry I had to get ultra technical and stuff there. It just had to be done. If you're still here though, I would like to thank you for sticking around. How's your spring going? You have any of them peeps lately? I'm gonna be honest. Those things kind of scare me a little bit. But yeah, I suppose that will be about it. Until next time, I will thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good one.